Permaculture is a holistic design philosophy that seeks to create regenerative systems in which everything is connected and serves a purpose to benefit the system. The term permaculture was coined by Bill Mollison as a combination of permanent agriculture, a permanent culture. However, the practices and philosophies that permaculture are founded upon are rooted in indigenous practices. Permaculture systems mimic patterns found in diverse natural ecosystems, and although its principles can be applied to agriculture, it can be a tool to interact and connect with nature and each other. Permaculture makes us become aware of our place within the greater ecosystem and squashes the idea that humankind and nature are separate entities. Teaching how to get into the permaculture mindset is even more important today when sustainable solutions are needed, not just to care for the earth, but also so that the earth can provide for us. To get into this mindset, a permaculturist observes the elements that influence each other in any area, whether that be a natural ecosystem or an urbanized one. And then once there is a holistic circular understanding, any problems that arise can be addressed with the knowledge of the whole system. Essentially, permaculture is not an outlined guide of concrete choices, but a form of systems thinking supported by the permaculture ethics and principles. It is a tool to make decisions about sustainable solutions. The Southside Permaculture Park is a model for how permaculture can be implemented in urban areas to create self-sufficient and climate-resilient communities. Permaculture is perfect for urban areas because it maximizes whatever available space there is, whether that be a planting container or using multiple levels of a park, from the rhizosphere, underground roots and mushrooms, to the canopy of a tall tree that provides shade for plants requiring less sun. The park exemplifies the ethic earth care because of the diversity of plants that we are growing. People care by creating a beautiful green space for people to relax and interact with others, and fair share by allowing the surrounding community to come to the park for fresh produce so long as they respect the needs of their neighbors and leave surplus. The 12 principles outlined by David Holmgren are: observe and interact. Taking the time to thoroughly connect with the land you are working with and understand its current state and process will allow for better designs of new features of the system. Catch and store energy. Catching rainwater at a high point is a store of gravitational energy. Catching sunlight with plants to build biomass is a store of chemical energy. When a system is charged with energy, it can be more productive. Obtain a yield. A yield functions as a reward that encourages, maintains, and/or replicates the system that generates the yield. This forms positive feedback loops, which amplify the original process or signal, so we must be aiming for rewards that encourage success, growth, and replication of sustainable solutions. Self-regulate and accept feedback. Applying self-regulation and accepting feedback allows us to adjust the designs of the system based on our observations of how it functions. When a resource is being consumed too quickly, the system adjusts to either produce more or use less. If the conditions are just right, this allows for expansion. Use and value renewables. Renewable resources are those that are replaced by natural processes over reasonable periods without the need for major inputs of fossil fuels and mined minerals. For example, using a clothesline for a solar-powered dryer. Produce no waste. Permaculture encourages us to look for ways to minimize pollution and waste through designing systems to make use of all outputs, such as compost, taking outputs of food consumption and garden management and transforming it into an input as a nutrient-dense soil additive. Design from pattern to detail. Pattern recognition in nature is an outcome of observing and interacting and reminds us that in order to find the patterns that work on complex scales, we sometimes need to look at the bigger picture and find the patterns that work on simple scales. Integrate rather than segregate. By correct placement of plants, animals, earthworks, and other infrastructure, it is possible to develop a higher degree of integration and self-regulation without the need for constant human input in corrective management. This supports transition into circular systems rather than linear ones. Use small and slow solutions. This focuses on designing based on human scale and accepting that the best designs are not always the instantaneous ones. The proverb, "the bigger they are, the harder they fall," is a reminder of the disadvantages of excessive growth, while the proverb, "slow and steady wins the race," is one of the many that encourages patience. Use and value diversity. Diversity needs to be seen as a result of the balance and tension in nature, between variety and possibility on the one hand, and productivity and power on the other. The proverb, "don't put all your eggs in one basket," embodies the common sense understanding that diversity provides insurance against the unpredictability of nature and everyday life. Use edges and value the marginal. Edges are dynamic and productive parts of all natural systems where exchange of materials and energy takes place. For instance, living soil is the three-way edge or interface between the non-living mineral earth, the atmosphere, and the biosphere. Paying attention to the pieces of the soil we can't see ensures it is as productive as possible. Creatively use and respond to change. Change is not the detriment of systems, but rather their natural state. Forcing stability where rigid structures will crack with pressure from unavoidable change only leads to wasting resources to rebuild.
When I think of permaculture, I think of connectivity and how everything kind of grows together.
Permaculture is revolution.
I think the biggest thing with permaculture is integration.
Holistically inclusive,
resourceful,
Sustainable development.
At least for me, permaculture is about taking the time to recognize and understand the patterns that we did not create and figure out how to best nudge them to meet our needs.
One of the most important things about permaculture is to work with the natural processes and to understand ecology and ecological processes and how systems work. And so all of my garden beds and what I'm doing in the forest is really trying to work with natural ecological processes rather than fight against them.
It mentions to me the intersection of culture and stability. And it gives us a chance to have the best of both worlds, both have what human needs and wants are, and also to not undermine our own resource base or our own life support systems.
It really changed my perspective very much because I already understood a lot about ecology and I was an organic farmer and everything, but I have to say what it really did was it gave me a word, a name, and a vocabulary to talk to other people about things I was already doing. So in that way I think permaculture is really powerful because it provides a language where people around the world can talk about these concepts.
Tend to be ambitious and somewhat impulsive and like to do big things, and so practicing permaculture has taught me patience and to do things a little bit at a time and see how they develop. Try not to be too, hard on yourself of like, I was trying to do this and something else happened so I did it wrong. Really try to approach it with an open curiosity of what happens if I do this? Be curious, make observations, and poke at things a little bit and see how the system reacts.
You don't need to buy something to be a permaculturist. Most of Americans have transferred their wants to consumption, I guess you would call it, or to being consumers, to having somebody who's a seller and them a buyer. And I think the whole idea of permaculture is to give you an idea that you can have a place that you like and that you live in and that you are happy with and that satisfies what you want, as opposed to what consumer society tells you.
So on the one hand, permaculture extends beyond the garden, but on the other hand, it shows us that everything is the garden. Everything that we do is manipulating our environment in order to serve some purpose, some goal, some desire of ours. And that is essentially what gardening is. And so I think the highways and the skyscrapers are as much a part of the garden as the tomatoes and the walnuts.
So one aspect of permaculture that's worked out very well for me is the idea of blending introduced plants with native plants. And over there where we were in the garden, it's mostly introduced plants like vegetables and everything from Europe. But you can see as we transition through here, we get into a mix of native plants and introduced plants. And then as we move towards the forest, it becomes all native plants. It's a pawpaw tree which is a native fruit tree that I planted there. And so the idea is you transition into a completely native food forest.
Mulch. Mulch is so important. It locks in moisture, it keeps the soil temperature regulated, keeps it from getting too hot in the summer, too cold in the winter. It fosters a beautiful environment for all kinds of beneficial microbes that are what create soil fertility in the first place. They can grow all kinds of edible and medicinal mushrooms. Mulch.
So here's a permaculture technique that worked out really well for me. I had to prune my apple trees, and they had gone so long since being pruned that I had to cut logs that were this big around. This is actually a piece of an apple tree, and I piled it up here for firewood, but I never got around to using it, and so it started to decompose. And then I found out about hugelkulturing, and so I decided that I would actually try it. These logs were actually starting to sprout with mushrooms, and so I filled the trench with logs that were sprouting with mushrooms, and that's my hugelkultur.
Using permaculture design and technique, we can help combat climate change. Farms that grow only one product in large quantities deplete the soil of essential nutrients, cause soil erosions, and requires the use of pesticides that pollute our water and soil. These large monocrop farms also require shipping of their produce around the country, which burns gas and puts CO2 into the atmosphere. Big agriculture is causing instability and disruptions in the food supply chain because it doesn't have the capacity to respond to a changing climate. Decentralized and local agriculture, using regenerative systems and designs like permaculture outlines, is the next step to combat not only the climate crisis, but also the increasing amount of food deserts across the U.S. Growing a diverse selection of plants in a local permaculture system decreases the possibility of a disease spreading amongst the plants, increases yield, mitigates flooding and runoff, and utilizes beneficial relationships to repel pests instead of pesticides. Diversity increases resilience because if one crop fails due to unforeseen climate changes, another one might thrive. The monocrop agriculture systems largely in place today do not account for the unexpected weather patterns that are tied to a changing climate. Permaculture can provide the tools to navigate the ever-changing future.